Welcome. We're going to give it a couple of minutes here as people start rolling in. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining us from. And Margaret, where are you joining us from today?
Hello, everybody. I'm in Rochester, New York, and we are having a beautiful fall with, the leaves changing and everything, and actually a warm, sunny day, which is a little unheard of this time of year. So yeah, happy to be here. Hey, tell us also name of your nonprofit. I'd love to get a feel for who the audience is and what kind of work you do. Helps me tailor the presentation too. Also, connect with me on LinkedIn. If you scroll to the top of the chat, you will see my LinkedIn. So if you're on it, let's connect. I do a lot on there. All right, we got folks.
People popping in from everywhere. Pakistan, Virginia.
Toronto, that's not far from Rochester. Awesome. Ottawa, cool. Got Texas, Massachusetts. Guatemala, fantastic. I was just in Costa Rica, which is not right there, but nearby.
Closer than we are on the East Coast.
Yes. And we've got folks here from United Way, from an organization called Age Well. All right, Evansville Museum of the Arts. Cool.
We've got lots of activity here in the chat. Oh, we can redrop the LinkedIn profile. Let me put that back in for you.
There we go. There it is. Hey, we've got someone from Costa Rica. Oh, moving to Costa Rica. Okay, David is the Director of Development and moving there. Well, I hope you surf, David, because there's some great surfing there. We've got Tim from Southwest Kids Cancer Foundation. Awesome, welcome. Who else is here? Leona from North Dallas Adventist Academy, a K-12 school. Fantastic.
New York City, not too far from you. Well, I know some people are still trickling in, but I think that we will probably go ahead and move along so that we have time to enjoy this presentation.
Sounds great.
So before we get started, this webinar is being recorded. You will receive the recording in an email after the webinar today. If you have any questions at all for Margaret during the presentation, put them in the QA area of Zoom and we'll get them answered at the end. Before we get started, I do want to give a quick overview of what we do here at Bloomerang. We are a donor database system for all of your fundraising and management needs. If we haven't had the chance to meet yet, I'm Kate Kramer, the Partner Marketing Manager. We'd love to chat with you. And I think Sarah's going to drop into the chat our Buy Now, Pay in 2023 promotion. I think it's lasting until the end of October, so please let us know if you need any more information on that. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret Brazda-Poirier, who is the owner and founder of Grants for Good. Margaret, welcome.
Thank you, Kate. I'm really glad to be here. I am a return presenter. I've been presenting several times through Bloomerang, and so I'm really glad to be back. And I hope you can see that cover slide. Our topic today is called Recession-Proof Your Nonprofit with Grants. Now, I'm going to say something right now. I'm going to change the title right here and right now. It really should be called How to Get Grants Even Through Crazy, Turbulent Economic World Crisis Times, shouldn't it? Because we technically aren't in a recession right now. A recession by definition is 2 quarters in a row where the GDP is negative, and we aren't there at the moment, at least not in the US. However, we are experiencing tremendous inflation. We are experiencing the ongoing pandemic, and people are still recovering from 2020 and 2021. So I think really what I'm going to cover today is what can you specifically do right now to get grants for your nonprofit, even in really turbulent times. So I'm extremely excited you're here. Just real quick, I'll tell you about me. That'll take about 1 minute. My name is Margaret Brosda-Poirier. I have had my own grant writing company since 2009, when we really were in a recession, if anyone remembers that. And it's called Grants for Good. We specialize in training nonprofits and their staff how to find grants and to actually write the grants. So we're a training company. We also do one-on-one customized coaching for your organization. So something to keep in mind, check out the website, Grants for Good. I love what I do because I get to meet all kinds of great people. And as I look in the chat, I really enjoy hearing where you're from, and more importantly, the kind of work you're doing. So we have everybody from Catholic charities, K through 12 schools, neighborhood associations, and everything in between. So I'm really glad you're here today with me. So today's outcomes, I like to talk about what you're going to leave with after this webinar is over. And I use the term outcomes very deliberately, because outcomes is a grant writing term. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to develop them, because these are probably some of the most important things you need to do when you write grants. But for today, you're going to learn all about the 3 C's to thriving in a turbulent economy, which we are certainly in. You'll also discover the 5% rule and why it matters to your nonprofit. And finally, I like to leave people with very distinctive things that you can do now and into 2023 and beyond. This way, when you listen to this webinar, you are actually going to take very specific steps that are going to get you on the way to getting grant funding. Okay, does that sound good? And I also have a quick bonus for you at the end. So grab that coffee, a snack, or whatever you like, and here we go. I first want to make sure that everybody here, and we've got hundreds of people here from all over the world, as we can see from the chat, I want to make sure that we all have a common understanding of what grants really are, because there are a lot of misconceptions. Grants are money that is awarded to your organization for a very specific purpose. It may be to run operations at your organization, or it may be for a very particular program within your nonprofit organization. But either way, grants are not simply free money, even though you don't have to pay them back. That's the beautiful thing about grants. They are not loans. So you don't have to pay them back, but they are for a specific purpose. And the other thing I want to make sure we all understand about grants is that they are very competitive. In fact, a lot of people won't even go this route. They won't even try to apply for grants because they will say, if I spend all this time writing a grant application, what if it's not funded? Or they'll hear that their colleagues have written grants that didn't get funded, or they will hear that a US federal grant only funded the top 2 or even 1% of all applications. That would be pretty discouraging. I don't want to discourage you, because what I have seen happen is that if you have a really good understanding of how to find the right funders and how to position yourself to write the grants, your chances of getting it go up tremendously. So do not be discouraged by the competitive nature. You have something valuable to share, and I want to help you be able to do that. Just briefly also, what are grants for? Why should we even bother? So I started writing grant applications back in the early 1990s when I was fresh out of graduate school. I was an environmental science major, and I wrote grants almost immediately for my local municipality, the county, because they had budget cuts. And here I was wanting to do some really innovative environmental work, and there was not money available to do it. So myself and a team of people around me, we taught ourselves how to write grants. And we realized the tremendous power of it, because grant funding can pay for staffing, whether it's staffing already at your organization or whether you want to hire new staff. It can also pay for any equipment needs. Maybe you need some training, perhaps some travel that is related to a program or project. It can even pay for the kind of boring things that you don't often think of, like your insurance, which you need, or your occupancy or rent, which you probably have to pay to stay in your building. Really just about everything. So it really depends on which funders you look for. And I'll talk about that in a moment, but some funders will absolutely fund staffing and others will not. So part of your research in finding the best funders is going to see who funds what. So to boil it down into 3 key categories, grants can cover program costs. And by program, I mean let's give an example, a youth after school mentoring service at a school for kids that don't have anywhere else to go. Maybe parents both work, or maybe they're falling behind in their schools. They're at risk of not graduating. So there's an example of a program. Grants can also cover operating costs. And by that, I mean your nonprofit's operating budget, which includes everything on the left-hand column of this slide: staff, equipment, training, overhead, occupancy, insurance, etc. And thirdly, grants can cover capital costs. Some of my clients that I'm coaching are looking to add on a new building, or they're looking to purchase land so that they can build, or they need some major equipment to increase their manufacturing. These are all considered capital costs. When you hear capital, think about hard goods, something you can actually touch. All right, so that's why we pursue grants, because they can do a lot. I want to make sure too that you understand that grants are an extremely powerful source of your revenue, but they should never be something you rely on 100% for your revenue stream. As you know, if you're with a nonprofit, you need to find revenue from multiple sources, from fundraising events, from individual donors, maybe some fees for services. But if you are not applying for grants, you are definitely missing out on something really big, okay? Because the grants are still out there. Last year, over $450 billion was given in grants and donations to charity in the US, and about $10 billion in Canada. I don't have the data for, I know Rwanda, Uganda, I know there are Costa Rica, Guatemala's here. I don't have the data, but I think it's worth checking out how much was given out in grants and donations. Also, I should say, if you are from an organization that is outside of the US, there are many US grants that will fund programs throughout the world. So something to think about as well as we move through this topic. All right, back within the US, just to give you another example, there are over 100,000 grant-making foundations in the US and thousands of state and federal grant opportunities. That's a huge number. So if someone ever says, oh, there are no grants out there for us, it is simply wrong. There are grant opportunities out there for you because there are over 100,000 foundations. The harder part, the more challenging part, is figuring out which one of those, or which 10 or 20 of those, are really a good fit for what you do, that are going to be likely to fund a museum in Evansville, Indiana, that are likely to be interested in Catholic charities. So the key is really doing some thorough research to find out who's right for you. So let's talk a little bit about how to find the best grants. Now, this is a big topic, and it's something that I teach. I have an online course. It's self-paced, and it's 8 modules. One of the modules focuses entirely on how to research and find the best funders. I can't teach you all of that in a short time we have together, but I want to leave you with a few thoughts so that you can perhaps get started. It's so important to first of all know what it is you want to fund. So which programs are more or most likely to get funded. Secondly, matching your priorities with that of the funder. So you have to kind of be a detective in this kind of work. Let me give you an overview of some of the types of funding sources that are out there. I like to put them into 4 categories. This is just my own way of organizing it, and it's worked for me for the last several decades. Government grants. Okay, this is a biggie. Like I said, thousands of state and federal grants. I know in Canada, hundreds of provincial grants as well. So I'm going to start, actually, I want to mention right now, in these slides, you're going to see some links. All right. I don't want you to have to write things down at a frenetic pace while you're here on this webinar. So after this webinar is over, Bloomerang is going to send you a link to the recording. They're also going to send you a 1-page document that I developed called Resources, Grants for Good Resources. And on that document, I have all the links that I'm going to refer to today. All right. So it's a PDF, and that way you can just click on them. You won't have to take a lot of notes today. All right. So types of funding sources. In that 1-pager, you're going to see how to find government grants. Also, community foundations. There are community foundations all throughout the United States, not necessarily in other parts of the world, but I can almost guarantee you that no matter where you live, if you're in the US, there is a community foundation that has an interest in you. There are also private foundations. Now, when I gave you that 100,000 number, most of those are private foundations. Don't let the word private scare you. A private foundation simply means it was formed as a charitable distributing agency that is tax exempt, that might have been formed by a family or some other independent agency. But it doesn't mean that it's private in that you can't access the funds. Okay, so private foundations are formed to strictly give out money. Now, they vary so much. Some of them are specifically focused on a very narrow area. Perhaps they are looking at giving high school mathematics scholarships to people who are going into a 4-year university to study mathematics. They can be that specific. They might be specifically for conserving wildlife on the Colorado Plateau, or they could be as general as helping families lift out of poverty or helping women affected by domestic violence. So there are so many different types of foundations. So researching them is extremely important. I want to talk about the 5% rule because if anyone tells you there's no money out there, we don't know where to go, you're going to tell them about the 5% rule. Here's what this means. And again, in the US, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, has a rule that if you are going to start a foundation, let's say you and I get together and our great Aunt Matilda just passed away and she had millions of dollars, and we want to start a foundation and start to give out that money to causes that are important to us. What will happen is we will be obligated to give out a minimum of 5% of the total assets each year. So if we are left with $10 million in assets, and that's the value of the foundation, 5% of 10 million has to be given out to charitable causes each year. Now, there are some nuances there, but that's it in a nutshell. If you want to learn more about it, I have an article on this in my blog. It's just my website, grantsforgood.com. Go to the blog section. You'll find a lot of good information there on a number of different topics. But that's the 5% rule. So the reason I tell you this is you may start to wonder, how much money do foundations have to give out? So let's say you have one in mind. What if there's a foundation, let's say in Evansville, Indiana, again, that you know is likely to fund museums, and you want to know, well, how much do they have to give out in 2023? Or how much did they have? What did they have to give out in 2022? Well, I can easily help you answer that. All you need to do is go to the public document, their tax return from 2021, and look at what the assets were in 2021. 5% of those assets have to be given out in 2022. The good news is, even though the economy has gone up and down and up and down with recession, with inflation, with the pandemic, and all the lingering effects of that, the good news is that on the whole, we've seen, at least in the US and in parts of the world, stocks go up pretty well. Now, I know they fluctuate too, but they have not dropped significantly. And so what that means is that foundations are building upon their assets every year, and they have money to give out, and they have to give out 5% of that. All right, so I'm going to leave you with that. That's the 5% rule. Let's also talk about corporate foundations. These are ones that you know of already. Think about any corporation in your community or in the country or in the world. They very possibly have a charitable foundation associated with them. Let's go big. Let's think about Ford, Toyota, Nissan. I'm going with the cars right now, okay? They all have foundations. You probably know of the biggest foundation in the world. Somebody type it in the chat. I want to see it pop up. What's the biggest foundation in the world? Does anyone know? Put it in the chat for me. Bill Gates, yeah, it's the Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the largest. Oh, somebody put Robert Wood Johnson. That's right up there as well. Absolutely. Yep, that's another big one. But Bill and Melinda Gates, that's the biggest one. And so you might have somebody on your board that says, well, why don't you just go for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and get us a grant from them? Well, easier said than done. Here's a rule of thumb. The larger the foundation, especially when that big, they are going to fund projects that have a really big, wide impact geographically, even throughout the world. Take a look at what Gates Foundation funds, and you'll see that they are very global. On the other hand, let's say there's a foundation that's a smaller family foundation located in your community. They have a lot of investment in what you do, and they may want to keep their money local, serving your local community. So that's often a great way to start grant writing. If you're new to this, even if you're not, sometimes going with those local grants is a very good beginning before you jump into the much bigger federal grants. It's something I often advise people to do. So that was the 5% rule. The key takeaways are that charitable foundation giving is directly related to what's happening in the economy. Are stocks going up or are they going down? Because what that does, and it's a lagging indicator. So what you'll see is you can look at the IRS 990, which is the tax form from 2020, from 2021, and you get an idea of how much they have to give out the following year. And it's called the minimum distribution rule. And this is what an IRS 990 looks like. I didn't give you my long history of how I got here to grant writing, but let me just jump in and say that for several years, I was the director of a private foundation. It was the family that started Xerox Corporation, you know, the copiers. And so I learned a lot of behind the scenes of what really happens at foundations and what kind of due diligence do they have to do. And so, as I mentioned, they have to submit an IRS 990 tax return, just as all nonprofits do. And it's a really valuable piece of information because when you look up the 990, and it may be a year or two old, you know, these things can take a while, but pick the most recent 990 and look at what their assets are. It's right on page 1. Also, you will get to see who else is on the board. And so perhaps somebody you know knows somebody on their board, or perhaps you're affiliated somehow. That's a great introduction. And lastly, on the tax return, you will also get an idea of what else that foundation has funded in the past. And this is really valuable information because you might be thinking, well, let's see, we run an after-school program. Is this foundation likely to fund youth programs? Or we are a very specific housing organization. Do they have a history of funding any kind of housing projects? So that's the kind of thing you want to look for in these 990s, okay? So I talked about how to find grants, how to find funders, and again, you will be sent this one-page document. I highly recommend grants.gov for US and international grants. The reason I say international is there is a federal, well, there are 26 federal agencies in the US that make grants. One of those is USAID. I've written several of those, and it's for doing work abroad. So it's a fantastic opportunity. But grants.gov, you will see all of those agencies. If you're in the arts, you'll look at National Endowment for the Arts. If you are a school, you've already applied probably to the US Department of Education, and so on. So check those out. Private and corporate foundations. Okay, this gets a little bit harder. I teach a lot more about this in my online course called All About Grant Writing. But for today, I want to at least share with you my favorite tool. It's called Instrumental. And it's this really easy search tool that helps you narrow down by geographic region, by keywords, by your mission, helps you narrow down who the best funders are for you. If you want to try it, you can get it for a month and you can get $50 off right away. You can use my coupon code GrantsForGood50. And I'm not telling you this because it's a coupon code, but it really is my favorite one. And I subscribe to 3 different databases just because that is my job. So the last one, the Community Foundation Locator. This link is also on your one-page handout that you'll be receiving. If you don't know who your community foundation is, this is a really great link. Click on it. You'll see a map of the United States come up. You pick your state and your community, and you will get the connection of who to talk to. Why talk to your community foundation? At least 2 reasons that I can think of, but probably many more. I love our Rochester Area Community Foundation in New York is phenomenal. They help me with gathering data for writing the grants. They actually give out a number of different grants. Now, not all community foundations do, but ours does. And I would say a lot of them do. So there might be grant funding there. And there might also just be some great connections to help you with your work. So those are the categories of grants. And we talked about the 990 as a search tool, the annual report. You can always check a foundation's annual report. Let's jump right into the 3 C's to thriving. And oh my goodness, my slide says 2021. So we are in a time warp. This should say 2022. And it counts for 2023 as well. Let's just put it this way. There are 3 key things I want to tell you that is going to make the difference between getting the grant and not getting the grant. So the first one is contact with funders. So if you are taking notes, write down these 3 C's, contact with funders. I know it seems like common sense to many people, but it's critical because funders, grant applications, behind that are the people that make the decisions. So starting to build a relationship and really talk with people is crucial. And I have a little photo here of a meeting that I had on Zoom, because we're all doing Zoom or some other online platform these days. But more and more, really, we're getting out much more in person again. So you might be wondering, oh, by the way, there's a Q&A function in this webinar where I'm going to be answering questions live at the end of this as well. So stay tuned and pop your questions in there, please. Contact with funders. You might be wondering, okay, Margaret, well, let's say I have found a foundation that I want to approach, that I think is a good fit with what we're doing. Why do I contact them and what do we talk about? So quite simply put, when you already have, let's put it this way, if you already have some funders that have given you grants in the past, the best thing you can do right now is stay connected with them. Tell them how you are doing. Remember to tell them what you are doing. Don't assume that they remember, even if they did fund you. And most importantly, talk about why you are still doing the work you're doing. And even if this is a funder you have never met in your life, they've never heard of you, it is still worth a phone call or an email or both to introduce who you are, and really keep this very brief, not a 2 or 3 page letter, not a 10-minute voicemail. This should be a short conversation or a short voicemail if you don't reach somebody. Tell them who you are, what you do, and why it's so important. When I work with funders, one of the things I hear most is they will tell me, well, Margaret, sometimes people just assume that we understand why their work is so important, and we don't. So if you're running an after-school program, make sure that you're clear on why this after-school program is so critical. Is it potentially saving kids from dropping out of school altogether? Is it addressing kids that already struggle with learning, whether through a disability or any kind of issues going on at home? Make sure you're very clear on why you're doing what you're doing. In other words, what's the really important need in the community that you are fulfilling? Definitely do your research before contacting funders. Remember the 990, use those tax forms, use Instrumental or a similar database to learn a lot more about them. Just Google them, look at their website. You'll learn a lot if they have one. Where to connect with funders? Well, certainly the links that I mentioned that I'm sharing with you are great, but sometimes you can connect with people associated with funding that are not quite so obvious. And for that, I invite you to go back to my blog and look up an article called "The Not So Obvious Sources of Grant Opportunities." And you'll see that I list a number of different options. Maybe your own place of employment. Maybe there are some networking groups out there that are, contain some great connections that you may want to make. Or any kind of professional affiliations. For example, because of my profession, I belong to the biggest national organization for grant professionals, which is called the Grant Professionals Association. I also belong to the Association of Fundraising Professionals because together we often host a Meet the Funders panel where we bring in some of the funders that we want to learn more about and invite them to come and talk to us about their most recent changes or current priorities. Also, social connections, conferences, social media. Oh, don't ignore social media by all means. First of all, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm in the chat box. There's my address, or just find my name there. Secondly, I use social media a lot to find out what some of our funders are up to. So you can connect with the Gates Foundation or the Ford Foundation or anyone in your community that has a presence, and get to know what they're all about, get to know who their staff are, and help them get to know your organization as well. So I think especially LinkedIn, many of them have Facebook pages. It is really worth going through that outlet, even if it takes a little bit of extra time. All right, so our first C was contact with funders. I mentioned a number of different ways to do that. Hopefully, if you just pick one, you have just moved further along than you did before we started this webinar a half hour ago. So I don't want to overwhelm you, but just pick one new thing to do, whether it's the social media or researching the funders or calling them. So the second C is all about consistency. And consistency is very, very important, because if you write one grant application and it does not get funded, you might say to yourself, I'm so discouraged, this isn't for me. Well, truth is, you will get a lot of letters that say, we will not be able to fund you at this time. All right. But you will get many more letters that say, your application has been selected for a $100,000 grant award, or less or more, but either way, those are the best. So it's very important to be consistent, because if you only send out one grant application a year, you're really not setting yourself up for success at all. What you're better off doing, and what I do and I coach my clients to do, is to develop that one template grant application. In my All About Grant Writing course, I provide those templates, but you're going to want to complete that one template grant application so that you can send that out to 10 different funders. I mean, you'll have to change it slightly each time, but you can send it out to 10 different grant opportunities or funders, and you know that several of those will come back with a yes, with a grant award. Another strategy that I use is that I like to send out, or encourage clients to send out 1, 2, or even 3 grant applications per month. The reason being that when you consistently send out grant applications, you will consistently receive funding coming into your organization all year round. So don't do them all in January, do them persistently throughout the year. All right, so that's super important. And there's my picture of a pipeline. All right, what is the evidence for what I'm saying? Well, I'm big into research. I want to be able to prove things. And there's a great report out there, the 2021 Grant Seeking Report. The next one should be out now. And the evidence shows that of people that submitted only one application, about 66% were awarded a grant. So those are pretty good odds. I actually feel like that might be a little bit higher. It might be a little inflated, only because I think the survey went to people that might have had some more experience with grants, but I'm not entirely sure of that. However, here's the number I really like. If you sent out 3 to 5 applications in any given year, 3 to 5 applications, 94% were awarded at least one grant. Those are pretty good odds now, right? So to prove the point, it's so important to develop that template grant application and get the applications out to multiple funders, because chances are you'll have to piecemeal a bunch of grants together to support the work you're doing. And our third C is congruency. And the definition of congruency is the quality of agreeing, being suitable, being appropriate. But here's what it means for us. What you do has to match with the interest of the funder. It's that simple. Your outcomes, which are essentially how you are changing life for the people you serve, or how you're changing, maybe you're working with animals or the environment. Your outcomes are, how are you changing your community? And so that has to match up with the things that matter most to a particular foundation. I will guarantee you there is a foundation, and probably many, that match what you do. Even if you are located in a tiny rural area in Alberta or in West Texas, even if you're in a very small unknown area, and maybe you are a faith-based organization with a very specific purpose, there are grants out there for you. There really are. I do want to highlight too, though, some big trends that have emerged since 2020, since the pandemic, since the economy went all over the place. There are 3 key areas of funding that I have seen emerge. One of those is there are still funds out there to recover from COVID-19 or to respond to the pandemic. Now, there were a lot of these grants in 2020 and in 2021. I still saw some of these even this year. Secondly, there is a big focus on racial equity, and also more broadly, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which includes people with disabilities. And so racial equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion are very big themes and very strong interests for funders, mainly because of what has been happening in our country and in the world over the last few years, or rather what has been recognized as happening in the last few years. So if you have a program that incorporates any of that, it's worth looking into grants. Also, a third trend that I've seen is more move toward general operating funding. So let me distinguish again what this means. When I started writing grants back in the 1990s, and when I started my company in 2009, it was very hard to get general operating funding, which means you get a grant for, let's say, $50,000, and you use it however you please to run your organization. In other words, they are trusting you take that money and make sure it goes to your nonprofit work. That's different from program funding, which is saying we will fund very specifically 20 youth to go through your after school program and the staff it takes to support that. That's very specific. But I have seen more trend towards general operating funding, which I think is very encouraging. I also have some tips on how to get general operating funding, even through program grants, but that's a whole nother seminar. But for today, what I would encourage you to do is rethink your target audience. Are there people in your target audience that might fall into that COVID response grant? Or are there people that you are serving that are affected by racial inequality, or where you want to really improve your work in diversity, equity, and inclusion? You also might want to rethink your programs and how they can meet some of those 3 key areas, and even your mission, if it's appropriate. And I'm not saying you have to do that. Perhaps you're already getting a lot of funding as you are, or you're finding lots of maybe arts and culture funding. Great, but I want to open up these 3 opportunities to you as well. So what can we do now to be ready? And then we're going to jump right into live Q&A. So stick around. I want to hear what your questions are. That's my favorite part of these webinars. But what can you do now? I want to offer you a quick free guide. I know you're going to be getting a 1-page document soon, but please go to my site, grants4good.com, and you will see a big banner that says download your free guide, 7 steps to grant success. I can't possibly cover everything in this webinar, but these 7 steps to grant success, it's a quick read. It's a 10-page guide. And if you're new to grant funding, or maybe you're not getting the success you want, just download that. And you will also have the opportunity to opt in to my newsletter, where you will hear about other trainings coming up. All right, so check that out. You can do that right now. And you can also start to prepare any of your essential documents. So in that 7-step guide, I have a list of the types of documents that you need to have ready anytime there's a grant due, just the most typical things. And so if you can do that now, let's say tomorrow you find a grant application that is a perfect fit, but guess what? The deadline's next week. So you're going to be scrambling to write this grant proposal. If you at least gather some of your documents now, you won't be wasting a lot of time doing it later. So that's just one of the tips you'll see in that 7 steps document. And I've got several of them listed here as well. Things like the IRS letter of determination, the board of directors list, all of your financials. And then there are some additional or optional documents that you might want to start gathering now. Things like your annual report, if you have one, your strategic plan, and I hope you have either that or some kind of framework that you can share with funders, because more and more they want to see that. Perhaps there are some letters of support you can start to gather now, some staff resumes or bios, maybe some cost estimates if you are looking to do a capital program. So just some things to think about. Also, a typical grant proposal. Grants they seem very complicated, but I'll be honest, it's something that I had to learn before there were webinars like this, before there was even much going on online. And so I've been teaching this topic now for, almost 15 years. And I finally just developed an online course to help people write each single section of a typical grant proposal. But just so you're prepared for what they are, you almost always have to have a need or a problem statement. You have to talk about your organization, the population you serve. You're going to want to talk about who you partner with, your collaboration. You also have to have your outcomes set out in a very, very clear, specific path or work plan to getting to those outcomes. And you'll have to prove, how are you meeting those targets? And that's called an evaluation plan. And lastly, the budget and the budget narrative. I love budgets. Many of the people I work with do not. So I focus a lot of time on helping you develop your project budget because it's so important and it can make or break your organization. So real quick, you'll see this in your one pager. I'm going to invite you to just check out what's involved in allaboutgrantwriting.com. Check out the course. It's a course that I developed. There are 8 recorded modules. And it's essentially so that you can get the skills you need to raise $200,000 or more. I put 200,000 in there because one of my customers just said, Margaret, I finished the course and within 6 months, I have raised $200,000 for my organization. So thank you, Crystal. If you're out there, you did awesome. I also really did the course because I want people to save time and frustration in this work. And believe me, I've done this and I've encountered all the problems. So I'm going to help you with that in the course. And I'm also there with you every step of the way. I run live Q&A to support my customers, the people who are in the course on a pretty regular basis. All right, so quick, there's some bonus materials. I'll have grant templates for you, a step-by-step workbook, which means when you finish that workbook, you have finished a grant application, period. I really don't like to have someone take an online course and not see anything for their work. So as you go through this, when you're done with it, you'll be done with your grant application as well. Okay, so we're going to go into questions. I do want to just let you know that we've got a $100 discount. It's only good until next week, October 13th. If you want to connect with me or get any more information, there will be a survey at the end of this webinar where you have a choice to continue to connect with me. I do not spam people. Last thing I want is to dump a lot of things in your inbox. But if you do want to connect, please check that box. I'd be happy to do so. And yeah, check out the course and use your coupon code before next Thursday. It's grants100 to get $100 off. All right, I want to hear from you, and there's my contact information too, so you know how to reach me. But I want to hear from you and your questions. And gosh, I wish I could see what's been going on in the chat while I've been talking. Let's see, a lot of thank yous. Hey, you're welcome. This is my pleasure. If it's not obvious already, I have a real passion for this. Also, you will be getting a copy of the recording. Yep, that's really important. I'm so glad. Kate, what kind of questions do we have? What should I be answering right now while we've got folks here before the end of the hour?
We have a few questions in the chat box. First, we have one federal grant, one foundation grant, and one community grant. Do you have a recommendation for a grant management tool?
So let's see, I'm looking at the box. Natasha, thank you for asking the question. We have one federal grant, one foundation grant, one community grant. I'm not quite sure what you mean by we have. Well, I'm going to assume that you have received funding from a federal agency, a foundation, and a community foundation. And if so, congratulations. I am super happy for you. Okay, yes. And since that is the case, you're wondering how to manage the grant. There are a lot of software options out there for grant management tools. I'm going to bring it over to Kate in a moment because she can speak to if or how Bloomerang can help you with that. But I also know that there are a lot of other software out there. I don't have a specific recommendation because, to tell you the truth, I am more involved in the front end with my clients. I help them find the best funders. I help them learn how to write each section of the grant so that they get the money. But what I can tell you in terms of grant management, and this is really important, what you write in your grant application makes a huge difference in how you manage the grant. I'm going to give you an example. When you develop your outcomes or your goals, and you say to a funder, we are going to I'll use the after-school program again. We're going to have an after-school mentoring program for 100 youth ages 14 to 18 for 12 months. And after that 12 months, we're going to show that 80% of those youth are still in school and have improved their grades. So you notice all the numbers I'm throwing out here? When you develop that grant application, you're going to have to be accountable to those numbers after you receive the grant. So you will be expected to submit, especially with a federal grant, you're going to be submitting probably quarterly reports. With a foundation grant, it might just be at the end, a final report. Same with a community foundation grant. Either way, you're going to want to be able to track those numbers and those data points to show that you either are or are not meeting those benchmarks. So I hope that's a helpful answer. And Kate, anything, can Bloomerang help?
Bloomerang can help with grant management. And if anyone is interested in that, the link was dropped into the chat earlier, but we can pop it in again. We do have a few more questions though.
Right.
One is in the chat box, so I'm trying to find that one before it goes away. What is your advice on narrowing down the foundations that you are researching for your grant?
Oh, I love this question. I'm so glad you asked. All right, I'm going to give you the quick version of it, okay? Because I talk a lot more about this in my All About Grant Writing course too. But here's a quick way to do it. You can get lost for literally for hours because let's say you use Instrumental or any other database tool and you start to type in, youth K through 12, Austin, Texas, you name it. And all of a sudden you get 200 funders that look like they might be a good match. Well, they're not all going to be a good match. So you're going to have to go through those. Here's the quickest way I reduce some of that. First of all, I want to make sure they fund in my geographical area. If my organization that I'm working with is located in Rochester, New York, let's say, and this foundation only funds San Francisco, California, then I'm not going to apply. So the quickest way you can narrow down your funders is find out who funds in your geographic area. That's number one. I would say the second one right after that is make sure they fund other projects like yours or other organizations like yours. That has to do with that whole mission alignment. Great question. I'm glad you asked that.
Margaret, before I go to the next question, I do want to make note that we're going to put a poll up real quick. If you need more information from Bloomerang, from Margaret, or from both, you can feel free to answer and we'll make sure that everyone gets that information. We have about 7 more minutes. So I think we're going to have time for the rest of the questions. I've got about 5 more to go. So have you seen many grants for fiscal sponsor organizations?
Yes, I have. And I can tell you some examples. I work with many arts and culture institutions, and sometimes my clients do not have their own IRS designated 501c3, which means they are not officially recognized as a nonprofit agency, but they use a fiscal sponsor. And the reason I explain this is some of the folks on this call might not know what that means. But what that means is that your organization is partnering or under the umbrella of an organization that does have their 501c3, so that you can still apply for grants, but the money has to only go to a 501c3. It can go to that parent organization or that one that you're collaborating with. So yeah, I do see I do see grants for organizations such as yours that rely on a fiscal agent or a fiduciary. One thing I would do though is as you are looking for foundation grants, make sure that it is acceptable to that particular foundation. But yeah, there's a lot out there. Good question.
Next up, can you talk a little bit more about what to do now? Also, is there at all a general time for deadlines for grants, or are they super scattered throughout the year?
Yeah, what to do now. So again, just download that 7 steps to grant success, because that will outline very specifically what you can be doing in 7 simple steps. But rather than go through all that by item, I would say what you can do now is think about the program or project that is in most need of funding right now. So I would say go into this whole grant writing work with one clear idea in your mind. Try to avoid general operating costs if you can, but think about a program that is really going to excite a funder, one that is making a big difference in your community, one that is changing lives of people forever, something that somebody can grasp onto and get a clear idea of what it is you do. So if you do anything today, narrow that down, because by doing that, you are now going to be set up for every other step in the grant process. You're planning, you're finding the best funders, you'll be set up for writing the application, developing your project budget, and so on. And the question also talked about grant deadlines, and actually in the Q&A, let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, I think it asked about grant deadlines. Are they all at once or scattered throughout the year?
Yes, that is what it asked.
Okay, yeah. And the answer is yes. So, I work with so many customers throughout the US, Canada, throughout the world, and the deadlines are all throughout the year. They really are. There just is not a pattern. The only time I see a pattern is, let's say I'm focusing on one particular foundation and they only have a once a year grant deadline. Then there's usually a big push to meet that deadline. But no, there's no trend, for example, of grant deadlines all being on December 31st or all being July 1st or anything like that. And that's why when I talk about one of those 3 C's, the consistency, I talk about having a constant pipeline of grants going out the door so that you have a constant inflow of grant funding coming to your organization. What else?
Let's see, we have, what is the best way to get staffing grants?
Okay, grants for staff. Yeah, they are out there. In fact, I would say about 90% of the grants that my clients develop are for staff, whether it's their existing staff or they want to hire new staff. So this is very important. The best way to do this, in a nutshell, is when you write your grant application, you have to submit a project budget and a project budget narrative. I would say you sit down with others on your team, maybe your CFO, and really look at what is the true cost of running your program or organization. And you know that staff is going to be really the biggest line item. So every grant application you write should be asking for some staffing as part of delivering that program or project. I hope that makes sense. And I hope I see you in my course, because I really focus on budgets on that. But quick and easy, make sure you ask for staffing in every single grant proposal you write, unless it's one of those few cases where the particular funder says we don't fund staffing. Looks like we have a question.
The last question I have is, as a new nonprofit, are they likely to receive a grant if they don't have a big history or following that's heavily established yet?
Well, congratulations. First of all, I see it. Tiffany sent this. Congratulations for starting a new nonprofit. You are on a wild and crazy path, and it's going to be extremely rewarding, as I think anyone here in the chat can probably confirm, rewarding and challenging. So here's the thing with grants. Yes, there are absolutely grants for new nonprofits out there. And oftentimes you may even want to search for what's called seed funding. Seed funding means, new initiatives, new projects. But you can also get grants even if you don't have a big history or any history of having grants, because everybody has to start somewhere. I have worked with multiple grassroots organizations or new nonprofits. And what I suggest they do is apply for some of the smaller local grants. Maybe your community foundation, maybe a local private foundation where you already know someone, or you know that they're really interested, or maybe a local bank. Maybe someone on your board is a member of a bank or an insurance company and they give out small grants. Go for those, because you will start to build up lots and lots of grant awards, even though they may not be the biggest ones. Maybe they're $5,000, maybe they're $10,000. You'll get those bigger ones, but I would start with some of the smaller grants and some of your more local funders first. Now, there are always exceptions. I can tell you a story where we got a massive international grant. It was their first grant ever. It was USAID, but those are the exceptions. So I would start there. So thank you for asking these questions. I really appreciate this.
Well, thank you, Margaret, and thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Anything else in the chat? I don't know if we have about a minute left.
I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
So, well, thank you.
I did have a
again,
question in the chat box from Gail.
Oh.
Gail looked on my website and cannot find out how you register for the 8-part training. Gail, that is because I have to redo my Grants for Good website. But if you go to all about, I'm going to type in the chat, grantwriting.com, go to all about grantwriting.com. That's my site as well. That will give you a lot of information about the course so that you can see if it's right for you or not. All right. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for participating, and thank you again, Margaret, for presenting. Feel free to join us again next Thursday for our next webinar, which will be at 2 p.m. Eastern. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.